St. Patrick's Day. All right, I'll just stand in the hall in case people cannot feel like this room is. Hey, come on in. Sorry, I know this room is. Thank you, I appreciate it.
You want this one on stage?
We decide that we're going to get more information. What?
I didn't send you the direction text, but I did like by you.
Oh, really?
I was too focused, so I didn't say anything.
Okay.
I wanted you to hear what I've been doing.
Okay. I want to hear. That's fine.
I like that.
You could totally do it if I got like your email. Yeah, okay. I didn't get the email from you though. I sent it during spring break. Okay. Where are my shoulders? Close. I'm sweating through my elbows. That makes sense. What are you looking at? I'm sorry. Why are my elbows? I could think that might be. I did too. They would. I'm so tired. Go to the backpack.
How do we feel about the lighting?
These rooms are not. Alright, happy St. Patrick's Day. Good morning. We are going to get started with the presentations for the Museum Studies Minor Colloquium. Because I'm expecting some people coming in late because of classes, etc., it's very much a casual environment. I encourage you to stay for all the presentations because questions and comments and feedback is always nice for our presenters to hear from their peers as well as from me. Before I get started with a few things about Museum Studies Minor, I did want to introduce our guest, visiting scholar here, Seb Chan. I think he's on his feet because he flew in from Australia over the weekend and he's still kind of getting into our time zone. So yes, we're very fortunate to have Seb with us on campus this week. And I'm delighted that he could be here for the colloquium to hear about what some of our undergraduates have been up to. Maybe Seb, you can share a few comments as we move along as well. So a few things about the Museum Studies Minor that most of you know, and those that don't, just a few things. You'll notice on our website we do have an events calendar. There we are, today's colloquium. And also Seb will be giving a public lecture on Wednesday evening. And this is a great place if you're interested in things related to museums to watch that space because we do try to keep it updated. I also want to point out a few things. So electives, I'm on the verge of finishing the fall elective list. Some of you I know are graduating, which means this doesn't apply so much to you. But this is a great place to look to see which courses have been pre-approved for Cognate credit. And I also, and this is to encourage any budding blog writers, I want to point out we do have a Museum Matters of Michigan blog that we launched a couple of years ago. And I'm always looking for more undergraduate contributions. So we do have Benjamin and Lindsay a few years ago wrote blogs. Actually, right at the beginning, they launched us off. And then Christiana wrote a blog last year, but I don't have enough undergraduate voices yet in the blog space. So if you've worked on a project, you've maybe want to review an exhibition that you visited, really we encourage and invite all of those kinds of voices on the blog. I will also mention that if you're a bit leery about just posting something out there in the ether, we do have an editor that works with you. So
Can I just say that, so I kind of started museum blogging in 2004. I'm still doing it now. It's the best thing you can ever do. It's a little scary at first, and the internet's changed, it's become terrible. But I would say that it's a good way to getting into writing a newsletter and other things, and there's a really good practice in sharing your reflections on the work you're doing. And when I'm looking to employ people in Australia, or when I was working for the Smithsonian, that reflective practice is something that is really important to do. And when I look back at some of the early stuff I was doing now 20 years ago, those reflections are really valuable, and it's one of those things like keeping a diary that I wish more people would do in the field. It's also super important because as the world balkanizes and, you know, getting into America is a little harder than it used to be, let's say, getting out perhaps too, it's really important for those international connections. It's super important. So I really recommend practicing while you can in a relatively safe place with an editor. That's amazing.
with an editor, yes.
That's super good.
Yeah.
Totally. Can't encourage it enough.
Thank you, yes. Like Seb said, you can all think of things you might want to contribute. And then finally, just as a kind of preamble to the presentations you'll be hearing today, the Museum Studies minor is an 18-credit minor, has 3 core courses and then 3 electives, which I just sort of shared. The electives allow you to really, I think the word is appropriate here, curate your undergraduate minor experience. And the other piece, which you'll be hearing about today, is this practicum in museums, which at the time that the undergraduate minor was established was the only program at the university that required an internship for students as part of the degree, sort of progress to degree. And so today, our colloquium will have a series of presentations, students who have worked in different institutions on very different projects, with different support staff on these different practica. And to me, I think this is one of the really unique and special things about the Museum Studies minor is that students can pursue and explore these areas and fill out both that academic column in their CV, but also the experiential sort of job working part of that CV. So, any questions before we get into the exciting? No, great. One just last logistical thing. We'll be here for, sort of an hour or so. Around 11, we have pizza coming and it will go over there. Right now there's some cookies and coffee crisp. For those who might not know, coffee crisp are little chocolates with coffee wafers. So if you like tiramisu, people like coffee crisp. They're Canadian. So help yourself, and if you need to leave out because you have a class commitment or we see people coming in, we'll just take it all in stride. The lineup today will start with Avienda, then Emma, Carly, Lillian, Trent, and we'll finish, last but not least, with Elizabeth. And so what we'll do is move from one presentation to the next. Each student can share their work, their thoughts, their commentary, get some feedback. I know I'll probably have some questions. Seb, I hope will also jump in. But you are each welcome to also ask questions. This is meant to be an open forum. It is not a jury. Okay, this is a conversation. So, invite Avienda to come up.
I'm Avienda. I'm the undergraduate intern for the
education department at the Kelsey Museum of Archaeology. The Kelsey Museum is an archaeological museum on campus on State Street across from UMA, and it specializes in Mediterranean ancient art, such as Roman and Greek and Egyptian art. And we also house many like ordinary artifacts, like our Cronus exhibit. So it's very interesting. If you haven't been there before, I highly recommend it. So before we get started with the regular presentations, I wanted to present about our student activities group that me and Trent are helping the education department develop currently. So this is a really good opportunity for students on campus to get involved with working in museums and working very closely with the staff, and such as the curators and the collections department. The group will have access to a museum budget, and it's mostly going to be focused on student engagement. Sometime the last semester we did we spoke to the community about whether or not they have been able to visit the Kelsey, and a surprisingly large amount of the student population have never been to the Kelsey. So we thought that this would be a really great idea to get more student engagement. And mainly this would be around events. So the activities group would be in charge of coming up with events that the Kelsey would put on that would focus on student engagement, such as curator talks, crafts such as mosaic making, workshops within the community, so maybe engaging with local potters and craftsmen, fundraising events, and fun events such as Ancient Food Night, where people can try foods from the Roman era. So currently our timeline is looking like we'll have more information about a recruitment meeting near the end of March, and we want to get this thing going sometime in April to work on a study day for finals week, and then we'll have more of an idea of what this will look like coming in the fall semester. But we would like to get an introduction to it out in April. So keep an eye on your emails. You'll get more information soon. We'll have a flyer for the recruitment meeting. And maybe we're working on maybe a social media presence, and then we want to have a pretty solid group by Festival next semester. So does anyone have any questions?
So recruiting happening in a couple of weeks, it sounds like, at least for the study day. Is it going to be an application-based recruitment process, or how are you imagining this unfolding?
So for the April event, we kind of just wanted to see who's interested and kind of do a test run for this fall or for the winter study day. But it will probably be application based going into the next fall semester. We just want to see what people are interested in, get a read on what people want to do, and then we will adjust accordingly.
I have one more question related to the idea of a student activities group. I know they've tried this in the past at the Kelsey, maybe a number of years ago, and they've had a student activity board at UMA, and they have a very active sort of docent board at Natural History Museum. I'm wondering, I know that Kelsey's recently has been working with a consultant on sort of strategic planning, and do you know if the student activities group is part of that sort of imagining the Kelsey and its connections to campus?
It definitely is. Yeah, I believe that they have just workshopped the museum mission, and we are trying to create a whole new vibe for the Kelsey that centers on student engagement because of that problem exactly.
Right. exciting.
Yeah, it is. It'll be really cool to see what they plan on doing.
Wonderful. Thank you, Emmy. So when we have the link for the recruiting materials, be sure to share it and I can disseminate it too.
Yes, of course.
All right, Emma.
Hi everybody, so my name is Emma Sisney and I am a senior studying anthropology with minors in museum studies and statistics. And today I'm going to be telling you about the work that I've been doing with data reconciliation and intellectual control through my internship at the University of Michigan Museum of Anthropological Archaeology. So first I'll give you a little bit of background information on the Museum of Anthropological Archaeology. It is housed at the Research Museum Center, which is a storage and research facility located south of campus. It also houses the collections for paleontology, zoology, and the university's herbarium. The museum is a research and collections museum, which means there's no exhibits and it is not open to the general public, but descendant communities, researchers, and students are encouraged to attend by appointment. So the museum itself has a history dating back to 1837 and when the university moved to Ann Arbor, but it was formally established in 1922. Today, the collection consists of more than 3 million archaeological and ethnographic artifacts, comparative specimens, and the associated documents from all 50 states and 6 continents. A large portion of the material is from the Philippines and North America. Okay, so before I talk about the work that I do at the museum, there's one more piece of history that I have to let you all know. With it being established in 1922, I guess you already assumed that it wasn't always at this like state-of-the-art research facility, temperature controlled, fireproof. Actually, from 1928 until 2018, it was at the Ruthven building, this building here on the left. But after 90 years, this old building, it didn't have enough space, it didn't have like the necessary climate controls, and there were other problems that came along with having an old building. So all of the collections were moved to 3 different buildings. The anthropological and ethnographic collections were moved to this building in the middle, the Research Museum Center, while the offices were moved to the bottom building, the School of Education, and then the Natural History Museum was moved to this building at the top, the Biological Science Building. So this move and its planning, it happened over 3 years from 2015 to 2018, which is not a lot of time at all for a move of this magnitude. So the fastest and safest way to move the collection was to put everything in a box and worry about it when we got there. So this is where my work comes in. As part of the box inventory team, I joined this last semester and I work with one other undergraduate student. Her name is also Emma. You can see her here in the middle. After the move, the physical control of the collection, it was well managed. You know, we had the temperature and humidity controls, the fireproofing, but the intellectual control of the collection, it was not in as great of shape because we also got a new database along with the move, and things are still in boxes and they were not recorded. So the work Emma and I do now helps to improve that intellectual control. We tackle various projects, usually going by archaeological site, but sometimes like a specific object within the site, like animal bones, for instance, and we go through the boxes. We physically get our eyes on objects in storage, and we update the records in the database based on what we see. Lots of times we're just looking to add storage locations, but we also update descriptions, confirm field numbers, and add inventory and catalog notes if we see something that is concerning or we run into anything. We also help out sometimes by adding physical labels to the boxes and like switching out bags or boxes that are damaged or like non-archival when we run into things like that. So the reason I have this picture of Emma in the middle is because I can't really show you any pictures inside of storage or like the storage locations on these records, but these are some screenshots that I am able to share that kind of shows you, like, for example, here on the left, when we come across some unworked animal bone and we look up the record, it says, oh, it's missing. But we've seen it now, so then on the right, we can add its location. The other work I started doing this semester as part of my internship is data reconciliation with indefinite loans. So today, the norm for museum loans is to set a fixed time for when the loan is to be returned. However, in the past, they had something called indefinite loans, where the objects were given to the museum for an indefinite period of time. The owner could ask for it back anytime they wanted without much notice. So you can see why this might be a problem for museums and why they don't really do this anymore. But because the museum has such a long history, like I already mentioned, we have records of indefinite loans from as early as the 1920s. So just like the box inventory team, there's lack of intellectual control here. So some of these objects are like part of loans that have records, some don't, some are missing information, like they don't have the correct legal status. So what I do is I go through all the different sources of data we have, which includes scans of the loan ledger, which you can see here on the left, scans of the accession record, which you can see on the right, and then also accession correspondence, database records, and the objects themselves in physical storage. And then my boss, she likes to say that I untangle the knots of all the information that we have about the loan so that it's understandable and easily accessible in the database. So I'll just go through a quick overview of what one example of like sorting through these knots of indefinite loans might be like. So first, I start by figuring out what the next loan is by looking in the loan ledger. And once I find what number it is, in this case, I think it's, 459, I search in the accession correspondence files for that number. And then I can read the accession correspondence and kind of get a sense of like what was going on here with the history of the loan. So in this case, the indefinite loan was from 1922. You can see at the top, that's like one of the earliest things. And then it was converted to a gift in 1967. So after I have that information, I search in the database for the accession file, which you can see over here, and I update the information so it reflects the entire picture that I just learned by going through all these documents. I have to confirm that all of the documents that are listed in the scans, like the paper documents, are attached to the records in the database, and in this case, they weren't. So sometimes I have to, as you can see over here, I'm like going in the search builder of our database and using key terms to like find those objects that have slipped through the cracks somewhere in our collection. So in this example, after a lot of trial and error, I finally found the red banner I was looking for, and then I was able to move on to the next thing. So I got to go through each of the objects and make sure that their information was up to date with the documents that I had and their legal status was accurate. And then finally, I got to close the loan record and attach the accession correspondence to the accession record, as you can see a little bit over there. So that the next person who wants to look at this accession, they can go to the one place in the database, and after all of the information I looked through, they'll find it in that singular place. So in this case, although I was able to completely untangle the knot, that is not always the case. Sometimes objects actually are missing. You know, there's such a long history. We've moved to some buildings, there's been extra storage. Sometimes we don't have things. Sometimes the accession correspondence is incomplete. There are many issues, basically, that come up when you're dealing with like intellectual control and data reconciliation work. So that's why one of my major takeaways is problem solving. But also I learned a lot about best practices. That was mostly through running into kind of the problems that we had to solve that were created by the work of past museum professionals or archaeologists and seeing like, okay, that's what not to do. And this interacting with the problems that were created by people in the past and kind of going through the accession correspondence as well from like all the way in the 20s, it made me think about the history of museums and the history of this museum specifically and how like the work I'm doing now will influence like the people who are doing museum work in the future. And then I also learned how to use the relational database. I'm in there a lot trying to find all this stuff. And then it also has inspired me to continue this work and continue studying museums in grad school. So lastly, I wanted to say that part of the Museum of Anthropological Archaeology's mission statement is that the museum is dedicated to original research on humanity's past, to the curation of world-class collections, and to sharing our knowledge with the public. And I feel satisfied knowing that the work I've done in intellectual control and data reconciliation is helping the museum with that last part of its mission. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Any questions?
Hi. So I just had a question more about, I guess, like the work that you do, specifically. You said that like the indefinite loans, or I have a few questions, but we'll see how many I can ask. Anyway, you said that the indefinite loans are like not ideal, and I guess I'm wondering, like, could you elaborate why that's the case? Is it just because like people forget that they like sent them there, or it's like a matter of storage? I guess I'm just wondering like why that's a bad thing.
Yeah, I think both of those things could be a factor. A lot of it, it's like we're like storing your things for an indefinite amount, and lots of times you aren't getting paid, you're not seeing anything about this, like, and these objects, they might like have no research use, or people might not be interested in them anymore, so you're using like the museum's space and resources. So I think that loans with a set time period are better, just so like you can at least have that check-in and be like, wait, we still have this, do you still want this? What do you want us to do with it? Rather than just being like, oh, you can keep it forever, and then like, oh wait, I want it back. Lots of times I read in the accession correspondence like some pretty sassy people being like, my dad gave this to you 40 years ago and it's mine and I want it right now. So I feel like you also eliminate a little bit of that.
Can I ask another question? Okay, cool. I was just curious also about like, wait, what was I gonna ask? I guess, so if somebody does wanna like give, wait, no, this is my question. Are you guys like currently, like, do you still like accumulate materials or like have people send you like, I don't know what to call it, like collections or things currently, or is that something that doesn't happen as much?
Yes, like I think we do still take loans and gifts. Like I don't know comparatively to the past, like the amount that it's happening, but yeah, it still happens.
Can I ask you, what's your reflections on the transition to the relational database? What do you see as the new forms of labour that are required to maintain that might be different from the cards and the books of the 1920s?
Yeah. I guess there's like both the benefit is also the drawback, that you're able to see like everything in the same place at once at the same time, but then also it is like the intellectual control aspect, it is more difficult to like manage all those things and make sure that like each record has varying levels of completeness too at the same time. So if you're thinking like, oh, we've got the relational database, we have all this information, and you go to look at a specific object and you don't see that information, you're like, oh, well, yeah. So yeah, I think that's one thing.
I'm wondering, you showed the picture of the boxes, Emma. So how far along is the Museum of Anthropological Archaeology with all of this unboxing and?
So I think we have more boxes with objects than space to put objects in the cabinets. So what we've been doing, rather than like cataloging each individual object, is cataloging like the boxes as an object. So I think if I had to put a percentage,
Just a guesstimate.
like maybe like a little over halfway.
Oh.
I think it's not too bad, but there still is a lot to go.
How many, what sort of in a regular day, what percentage of errors would you pick up, or things that are mislabeled, or boxes that don't have the right stuff in them?
Yeah, so
How common is that?
it just depends on like the kind of site we're working with, and honestly like the archaeologist who did the site. I don't wanna name
No
drop,
names
but
named.
but like the last project we were working on, it was like a site in Iran, like archaeological fruit about a lot of animal bones, and probably like every fifth one, if we were lucky, sometimes more frequently, it would be like, this numbering system is totally different than any other kind of numbers that we've ever put on this before. Or like we find like some objects from the same archaeologist are like the Iranian matchboxes are, and that's what's holding them. I mentioned the non-archival materials are like a pack of cigarettes taped shut. It's like, you find toilet paper. So
Did you get a sense of the personality of the of the cataloger as you were doing this?
yeah, for sure. And then this specific archaeologist who comes to mind, I was able to like meet him. He came into the lab because it's like you have to ask him for help. And I was like, wow, this really all matches up.
Do you feel like I'm poking at this because when I was working at the Smithsonian, we did this work digitising the Cooper Hewitt's collection in New York, and most of the records were terrible. But putting them into the database, we kind of felt that there was something lost. Once you went to the relational database, you lost the personality and the nuance of the collector, and in some cases the cataloger, and in some cases the curator. So it's the sort of the flattening that digitalisation creates. I wonder how you might think about revealing that personality in the digital space that very much comes through in the style of the writing in the analog forms.
Yeah, for sure. I totally agree with that. I definitely see that. I think sometimes there's like, we have extra fields like notes, we have like interstitials in the storage, and like if there's something really funky, like the taped up cigarette carton, it's like, okay, well, it says that there's shells in here, but it's in a taped cigarette carton. So, like those glimpses of the personality get through when we like describe the situation, but otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Thank you, Emma. And I guess the space constraints that you mentioned with not enough room for the boxes that remain to be unboxed gets back to why you don't want these indefinite loans taking up space.
Mm-hmm.
Hello. I did a four-night internship at the University of Michigan Museum of Art as an art handler. So I'm just going to share a little bit about that experience, some of the opportunities, some of the challenges that came with it. UMA, as you know, is right across the street. It's an art museum. Its collection extends from antiquity to contemporary pieces, and it still works very collaboratively with a lot of the artists that they're bringing in for very different showcases. We have one visiting exhibit and one collaboration-based exhibit right now on display. You should definitely go check it out. But it's a really diverse collection at some times. At other times, it's like, wow, why do we have 5 million things of these? But it's a really wonderful institution, and I feel like it's trying its really hardest to reflect the desires of our community here on campus, as well as reach out to the student body and to get students involved. There's students in almost every department, if not every department, involved in other internships, and they are all paid positions. UMA doesn't do unpaid internships. They like to recognize students for their work and to show them how much that they value their assistance. So, just a little bit about me. I'm a senior in anthropological archaeology, a few minors, one in museum studies, of course, and then I'll be pursuing further study in indigenous archaeology with an emphasis on collection-based research. At UMA, I'm an art handler, as mentioned, but I also sit on the student advisory board, which is a board of undergraduate students who mainly support the PAL department, which is Public Education and Learning. And so a lot of what we do is work on like student-facing events and programming, and it allows the museum to kind of get a better understanding of what our underclassmen body wants out of any event, any opportunities. We do a lot of professional development opportunities as well. So it gives students opportunities to work alongside and to network with different museum professionals, kind of get their expertise and learn from them. The art handler position, it's described as a technical position, whose main goal is to support teaching and learning with the museum's collections. This is super broad. Most of my day I'm spent working with visiting classes, scholars, and museum curators, so it really allows you to kind of talk to a bunch of different people and assist based on different wants and different desires, especially research-based. A lot of the classes are repeat classes from professors who've been doing this for years, ever since our study rooms have been opened. We have 2 study rooms, and throughout the week, on a busy week, we'll have like maybe 6 to 7 classes come, and that requires professors sending in curated lists from our collection, and it gives students and researchers and everyone opportunities to see objects that are not on display. So what we pull into study rooms are everything that's in our permanent collection that is either not set up to go on display or hasn't been on display in a while. So it really kind of brings new life into some of the pieces that will not be seen otherwise. We also work directly with our curators, so they'll send us lists every week and we'll collaborate with them talking about pieces that they want to see, pieces that are difficult to pull. There's a lot of flexibility that's involved in this role. You have to have eyes on most every piece that comes across your desk, and that requires a lot of searching. Everything's listed in the database where it's going to be, but sometimes like shelf 1 is not where shelf 1 probably should be in relation to the other shelves. So a lot of the time it's searching around, it's looking for pieces, it's getting eyes on how big they are, because that'll determine the time it takes to pull them, what you need to pull them, who's going to help you with that, and other sort of supporting material. A lot about this position is also multidisciplinary, so you work primarily with the museum's collection management team. Your direct boss is going to be the chief registrar, but you also work with the Pell Department, Public Education and Learning, and as well as other curatorial activities. So there's a lot of different realms that you're able to tap into. So even though it's just within collections management and registration, it doesn't limit your exposure and your experience. And then you gain so many skills in this position. Art handling, of course, being the primary one. Transportation, the ability to think a little more critically about how you're interacting with art pieces or objects of different size and material. Also, condition assessment comes in every once in a while when looking at works on paper or looking at sculptural pieces. You get to make that call if you think an object's been pulled too many times for a room and it's a little too fragile for continued use like that, as well as location management within the database and within physical location. And this is my desk, and that's my dog. Some of the opportunities, I really feel like this position has opened a lot of doors for me, even in just the year that I've worked as an art handler. Of course, it's really broad, but there's a ton of museum-related skill building that you get in this position. Art handling, of course, being the primary one, but you also learn communication through interdepartment collaboration. You get to talk to almost every department within this museum. A lot of them come to the collection as like a core basis for what they're going to be doing. So you get to assist them with that. You get to talk with researchers. You get to talk with your curators. A lot of different programs. Like we just had the K through 12 department. We had a very special viewing for them for one of their middle school classes, and so instead of having them come into the study rooms and have kids walking in and out, because it's still kind of controlled access, we were able to set it up for them so they're able to do more of a passive viewing and they're able to kind of stroll at the leisure. So you really get to collaborate with different departments, and you get to network with a bunch of different people. So I think I've met almost everyone in the museum, except for maybe development, but we're in a different office, so I think that's why. But yeah, you have a lot of interdepartment exposure, and then you learn a lot about collection. You're really supposed to be able to know in your mind's eye where something is, if you can, especially the more familiar pieces are the ones that are pulled really frequently, so it makes you get really familiar with what we have. And also when researchers come, they ask a lot of questions. And so it's really best that you kind of know what they're researching, as well as other tangential pieces that can kind of support them, and then you build that dialogue as well. Database fluency is a really big one. I would say 50% of my job I'm in the database. I'm either pulling lists, I'm creating lists, I'm looking at objects, I'm looking at object location history if I can't find something. Our database is really well set up. We have almost everything that you need on there, everything from when was the last time it was in a study room to when is it going to be in an exhibit next, the donor profiles, the collection-based profiles, and so you have to be able to have a certain level of fluency and ease in going through the database to really get this job done. But it's something that you learn directly on site, and it's skills that are incredibly transferable. You work directly with registrars and curators, which is amazing exposure and amazing opportunity to kind of have more of like an intellectual base to this position. It's a very technical base. We're doing a lot of physical moving and a lot of physical labor, but there is that scope for also your own personal research interests, as well as getting to talk with curators critically about some of the collections that they're pulling, why they're pulling a piece in a class session, what they're thinking when they're looking at something, how it relates to other pieces. It's really wonderful. And then, of course, you get a lot of exposure to upcoming installations, exhibits, artists. Through this opportunity, I was able to get to attend a more private event for Jared Liu. He's our current artist who's visiting us in our exhibit, Strange You Never Knew. So I got to hear him speak, look at his work a little bit, right, but well before the exhibit had opened, as well as you kind of just get like little glimpses here and there when you're in the collection space of things that are planned for the next winter rotation. So this is a gathering. It's UMA's permanent collection, but it kind of rotates every semester. And so we got to sneak peek at some of the pieces that are currently on display right now. And then, of course, handling is the most important skill in this position. You learn really, really fast what it means to handle different objects of different materiality, as well as what objects not to handle. So this vessel over here on your right, it's massive. It's like the size of this desk, about yay tall, and our database is great, but it only measures like one. You can only see one measurement when you print out a list. So we're like, that's fine, we can do that. We pull the shelf back, and we're like, oh, actually, hold on. We got to reach back out to the class because there's no way this is moving. But you learn really quickly how to handle different objects. This piece on the left, it's heavily beaded, lots of very intricate details, lots of loose material, a lot more fragile than I would say like the matted work over here, which is a picture matted on like a really thick cardstock, versus a scroll over there from our antiquity China collection, which is even more fragile. So you get to learn really quickly to trust your gut, but also to have that space to step back and to really think before interacting. And we have a bunch of great museum professionals who will lead you through this, but it's a really wonderful opportunity and a really wonderful position that allows you to, it allows you to be more aware sometimes of even your own self, your own position, what it means to interact with art, kind of the stuff that goes on in the backside of museums. So yeah, that's just something about handling. You also get to explore other aspects of collections-based skills. This isn't one that was necessarily listed on the position, but something that I got to do is something that I also really enjoy doing is a lot of artifact and object photography. A lot of times there are researchers who aren't here physically and they need to see a piece or they need to get a little bit of a snapshot, and so they ask us to photograph it. I've done all of these photographs, some of them either going into the collection as the object's profile image, others getting sent out, of course. And then I also had a lot of space for personal and cultural opportunities. So I'm Pacific Islander, and Pacific Islanders, Michigan, what's the connection? It's not that strong, but there are pieces here. And through this position, I was able to have like a greater exposure to what's here in our collections, as well as had a really supportive department who allowed my student organization to interact with some of these pieces, most of which are really meaningful to us. None of the ones that I'm showing right now carry any like spiritual significance for you to be viewing them right now, so don't worry about that. But yeah, it was just really wonderful to be able to explore my own cultural identity while working in this position. So this painting here, it's done by a Chamorro artist, which she's also from the same island as me, but it's a painting of Dan Papa McMullen, really famous Tongan poet, scholar. author, and so we got to kind of interact with the piece in a way that's a little more non-traditional for some of these roles. Some of the challenges, I don't have any pictures here, but the biggest challenge I've kind of run into is we have a really big collection, and sometimes we don't necessarily know what's exactly in the collection, or if we do know what's in the collection, sometimes handling about certain pieces isn't as like strictly enforced or like seriously considered at the time. Of course, this is no fault to my department, but there is a piece that is from a tribe in Africa that is very controlled about who should have access to viewing, handling, and interacting with. And I wasn't informed until we were in a study room session of like 30 other people looking at this object that only pregnant women were allowed to touch or look at it. And so this is something that is coming up in a lot of museum collections. I would say almost every museum collection has this issue where there is spiritually significant material that either isn't known about, or there isn't like a specialist, or there isn't someone who would encounter it that would have that kind of conflict in relation to how the object needs to be treated. And so this was one of the biggest challenges I faced, just because it's something that's really essential to my positionality, but I can see it as a potential place for growth within the museum as well. I feel like we could have a better focus on what is actually in our collection, what does it mean to interact with these pieces, whether that means just putting a little red label in the database saying this is a controlled item, or there's another note in the handling section where this is information about the item before art handlers or before museum technicians or researchers interact with it. This is something that they should be informed about, more like informed consent basis. I'm not saying that all museum collections that have spiritual significance can't be viewed or can't be seen or can't be handled, because that also depends on a person's own positionality or their comfort level with that. But yeah, that's just food for thought. And then these are some of the great museum professionals I work with. So Corey Groth, he's my direct boss. He's the chief registrar, but I work really closely with Katie Pritchard, who's amazing, associate registrar. Yeah, these are just really great individuals to know. And once you kind of get to know these people, you also get to know their network as well. They're really great about if you have a question or if you need any recommendations or you're looking at programs, they're like, let me tap into my network and I'll find that answer for you. But yeah, so that's just a little bit about the art handling role. I really recommend it. It's really wonderful. There's one other art handler, but both he and I are graduating this year. So if anyone is not graduating, I really recommend keeping an eye out for this position. I learned a bunch and it was really great. Thank you. Sorry, questions?
Thank you, Carly. Any questions for Carly?
Can I ask about the access
Yeah, absolutely.
controls? I think that's super interesting, and I'm surprised that there wasn't already those access controls in the database. Tell me more.
So I think it has to do a lot with the African collection itself. A lot of it comes from questionable provenance during a time of collection and a very specific donor who was collection, but there's quite a bit of it. And so I think our curators are still working their way through it. But this piece they did know about, so I feel like this was a misstep on whoever it trickled down to. I feel like it should have been caught a little bit before it got into the classroom, but we were able to have that dialogue within the classroom with some of the students, with the professor. This is a piece that we would prefer not to see anymore. We don't want to pull this for the class. We would prefer if you didn't pull it for the class. But it is something that...
How did the students react to that?
It was not great. It was a midwifery class as well, so I feel like they were more culturally aware or more sensitive to some of the material there. They had a greater understanding of what this kind of means to any community, and so they didn't react really great. They acted a lot like how I reacted too. We were all just kind of standing, went piece from piece. This is the last one we're looking at. We've been in an hour and a half we were in this classroom with this piece, and we're like, oh, wow. I wish that we had this information. I wish that we had the ability to choose, almost. But the students, they were okay at the end of it. They were like, I'm glad I got to share my piece about it, but next time, for the sake of other students, we'd prefer that you didn't show this, or we prefer that you was in the beginning. Hey, this is something that's here. Like you could have covered it, and then we could have chosen if we wanted to see it or not. I feel like there just needs to be greater dialogue about a lot of the collections pieces. I'm really sensitive to this because of my own positionality, but it's definitely something that's starting to pick up in a lot of museums. And we do have a few pieces in like our Oceania collection that I was able to go through and mark. This should not be on display. Please don't attach a picture to this. And the museum's been really great about that.
Was there a database structure that allowed for that already in the
Yes.
system? Yeah.
So our database structure allows us to have restrictions on objects. So you'll see that when you go open object profile, as well as there will be some note. You don't get to see the full reason, only registrars get to see that, but you're allowed to put in a note, hey, this is why, or hey, you need to check with the registrar. So it also gives opportunity to kind of slow down a little bit and to talk more explicitly about like what you're handling.
I'm wondering, Carly, because you get to be in the room as other students are able to interact or see pieces for the first time, is there something that you pulled that you then were either surprised or maybe delighted at how it was received by in the study room? I mean, of course, my office is right on that hall, and I always wonder, I wonder what they're looking at today. And I cannot always read, the expressions, but is there anything that,
They all racked pretty well, but not one where it's been like, oh my god, this is like completely changing my view because I've heard a little bit more about it. We've had a lot of interesting discussions around photography because that's what a lot of our collection is. It's works on paper or it's photographs. So there was this one piece, it's called, I forget its full title, but it's basically this girl at a bar mitzvah age 12, like that's the title, her name at a bar mitzvah age 12. And so what one of my supervisors who wasn't on that list, he works with the Pell department, what he likes to do is he'll go in and he'll turn the labels backwards so that they can't see it. So when he has a class come in, he's like, I just want to know what you see. Look at this and tell me what you see. We'll go step by step and kind of talk about what you're looking at before we jump to analysis. And so that specific piece, people were talking about so many different aspects. Like in the classroom, it's completely different how you can see a piece versus when you're just looking at it. They pull up all these details that you never noticed before, and it's like a veil unlifts before your eyes because wow, that's right in front of me, and that completely changes the composition of this work, and I never noticed. So they got to pull a lot of information and almost reach kind of the same conclusion as that title without even seeing it because they were able to sit for a minute and kind of critically think. So I think that's one of the best parts about our study rooms, especially when they work with Dave, who is the museum professional. He really wants them to go in curious first before they kind of look at the title and let that really control how they're interacting with it.
Did you? So I popped in to see Jared's show yesterday because I was trying to stay awake. So there's that SNES video game adaptation of Street Fighter, right? Where the visitor has to play it to make sense of it. Was there discussion about how did with that particular work, with the interactivity of that, and the need for the visitor to physically touch it and play it? It's also really fragile as a result of that,
Because that wasn't it wasn't part of our piece. It was kind of something that was acquired at Jared. There's less of a control about it being like preserved in that sort of sense. He wanted that interaction because it did make the viewer implicit in the experience. I mean, if you haven't visited his exhibit, there is a video that you'll see where it's a bunch of people in Michigan who are beating up a car in front of a Chinese restaurant. It's a Japanese car, and they're taking baseball bats to it, they're swinging at it, they're destroying it in a way of their form of protesting against the Japanese auto industry in Detroit. And so kind of right after that, you have to interact with this piece. It's just like a standard video game kind of control system, but it's you who's playing in Street Fighter and you're smashing this yellow car as well. And it's making the viewer implicit in both the abuse but also in the experience. Like you really feel the impact of that violence even more so because you're the one perpetuating it. And so I feel like that sort of interaction really overweighed any form of preservation around this like control system. The interaction with the piece was more impactful than perhaps like just preserving it as its entity. So I feel like it all points.
And tomorrow we'll meet the curator
Oh, cool.
of the
Great.
show.
Yeah, it was a good chat.
Thank
It's really cool.
you so much,
Thank you.
Charlie. Lily.
Hi. So over this summer, I worked in the Howell Area Archives, which is a place that I worked in my hometown. I went to community college before I transferred here, and I got to work there, and so it was nice to return to some place I was familiar with. It's a very, very, very small institution. It's the seat of the county, so it has a lot of stuff around Livingston County, but it's still like not a U of M sponsored sort of place. It's one room that's housed within the library both physically and administratively, and because of this structure, support and interest for it tend to ebb and flow, and necessary labor is not always available. Smaller projects tend to kind of fall by the wayside in favor of like more important, more necessary projects like the things that I got to work on, which is pretty exciting. Yeah, but it was founded in the 80s and it was maintained by community members, founded by community members. It continues to this day, mainly supported by the community that it exists in and for. So when I first started, me and my supervisor Jessica talked over a couple goals. Currently, the archive is still closed from COVID, so there aren't any visitors like allowed in. They're still working on it. It's in the final process of being like finished up for that, so that's exciting. But we wanted to look at access, organization of the collection, and preservation of very sensitive material that we had. Yeah, because there were a lot of things that are unorganized or at risk of disintegration in the collection. So I got to work on 2 big projects and a bunch of other random things I'm not going to talk about. But the 2 big projects I worked on were the continued digitization of the collection, which included scanning in a lot of newspapers, photos, and mainly legal documentations, or legal documentation of like land use and stuff like that. And one set of objects I got to work with were a couple of newspapers from the 1890s. These were housed in a storage unit with a bunch of other newspapers, so they weren't in the greatest condition. I had to disassemble these and then just scan them into a larger collection because we just can't keep them anymore. We don't have the space for it and they're not in a state where it's worth keeping them. But this was kind of cool. It meant I kind of had to piece together a lot of newspapers and make sure that they were all in order. The ink was pretty well preserved, so page numbers were very, very helpful there. But I got to scan them into a larger digital database, which was nice for preservation and then also for research access. Then the inventory process. We do not have a record of any inventory. Just in general, we have a list of all the boxes listed alphabetically, but not what the items in them were. There's about 1,000 or so boxes, and I got through 11 over the summer. This totaled to about 600 or so objects, mainly photographs, documentation, books, and weirdly a lot of CDs. But luckily through this project we were able to start maintaining everything in the collection and start labeling everything in the collection. And it was also really nice to find a process to be able to start doing inventory, which is again a thing that had just kind of not gotten done for a very, very long time. And then I just did a lot of small things. A lot of times people would come to me because I was the person, again, a lot of the people working here also worked at a library, so they had their time split between 2 things. So I was kind of the person people came to whenever something was like needed in the archive, which was kind of cool because it was like, wow, I know a lot about this place, which is also really stressful because it's like, wow, I know a lot about this place. Yeah, so what I learned is that there's really not a lot of support for smaller institutions, which is really frustrating. There's not a lot of financial support, and sometimes community support is also gone, which is, happens. A lot of times necessary steps are just not taken because they can't be done or they aren't known by the community. But there is a lot of people who want to help with this sort of thing. We got a lot of accessions while I was working there. A lot of people want this to be a place that exists. There were a lot of volunteers that also worked there while I was there. It's not that people don't necessarily want to help this, it's that they don't know how. And it's nice to see that happen when it does exist. So, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Lily.
No problem. Any questions?
If what would your advice be for small institutions with volunteers?
Volunteers? I mean, I would say, advice for the volunteers or for finding volunteers or for...
I guess that you were saying you stepped in and there wasn't a lot of process there, and you came up or you developed processes.
I would say the biggest thing is having people know how to record things. Because a lot of people, when they founded this, they just didn't, they knew the information that was here. They knew where they got stuff, they knew where they had accession things, but they just didn't write it down. So that's the biggest thing that gets so many times, yeah. I would say just the biggest thing is training people what information needs to get written down and how to write it down. And having that process be recorded every single time as much as possible. Because people don't know if they need to do that.
I'm wondering, when you listed the goals, preservation, for documentation, we heard throughout your, ultimately, as sort of a section of the library, what are the larger usage and access objectives of the Howell archive?
So digitization is a big thing because, there's also opening the archive back up
Right.
for visitors.
Is it still closed? Yeah.
Love it. But also digitization is a pretty big thing because having that sort of thing be accessible from anywhere in the world would be nice. Because a lot of people aren't going to come to a little town in South Michigan to answer one question. Having that sort of thing is also good for preservation. I think all these things do ultimately go together because we don't have the space to hold everything, and so if you have a digital space, there are issues that continue with digital preservation, but you at least have something that maybe is a little bit more consistent than what physical preservation can offer. So I mean, digitization and then opening the archive back up were the two main things for access. And the library in general is, it's a library, you could just go there.
Right. Okay. Oh, it's interesting. And of course, we're at this very difficult moment right now where certain types of collecting bodies, including libraries and museums, are being undervalued. At least that's the rhetoric around it. And we're seeing things happening that when we look at something like a small municipal archive or museum or library, these are the institutions that already struggle for resources, and it will only, I fear, be more acutely felt, not in the long term, but almost immediately. Yeah.
I think the social license there is really interesting, though, that often the smaller organisations and community organisations have a richer and closer connection to their communities and are valued by them. But often the organisations don't know how to leverage that value.
Yeah, there's not the knowledge there to be able to kind of use the community support that they have.
And I just happen to have shared several grants like Mellon Foundation, and some of these foundational grants are specifically targeted to this kind of institution where you've got people doing meaningful work but don't necessarily have the resources or the personnel power, even with exceptional volunteers, right? So, yeah. Any other final questions for Lily? Thank you so much.
We do have, Christy Elkins has brought some pizza, so if people wanna grab something while I see if I can turn our next. There we go. Don't be shy. Someone needs to take the first slice. All right. Alright, thank you, Brendan. So Trent will be our next presenter. Thank you, Trent.
So, hi, my name is Trent Hopkins, and this is about my work at the Kelsey Museum of Archaeology, working with the coordinator of university programming. So, to give a brief rundown on the Kelsey, this isn't necessarily what I've been working on, but I find that working in an archaeology museum, I'm a very big history fan as well. Being in the building is part of the joy of working at the Kelsey for me specifically. I love that old castle. It's not what it is, but I'm a big fan. So it was established in Newberry Hall in 1928. It's the product of Latin professor Francis W. Kelsey's collecting. During his tenure from 1889 to 1927, he just collected artifacts from the Mediterranean and ancient Near East. And so then, beginning in 1924, it was displayed kind of as a collection, and then in the 1956, they named it after him from the Museum of Classical Archaeology. But today, between the excavations at Karanis and Seleucia on the Tigris, as well as more excavations carried out in the 20s and 30s, we have about a collection of 100,000 artifacts and an additional 25,000 archival photographs. So that also includes acquisitions that continued after Kelsey's death. So what does university programs cover? Now, I work with Shannon, the coordinator of university programs, and this is in the Department of Education and Outreach. So at the Kelsey, it's made up of two different components. There's the programming for internal visits in the form of classes or other university groups, which would be university programming. Then there's also programming for K-12 visits as well as the wider public. So I'm working under the first one, with my work primarily focused on what goes into planning these visits, documenting them, as well as using the information collected to improve the visits themselves as well as our planning process. So the process that goes into visits, at the moment, it begins with an instructor reaching out to Shannon. And so they reach out with the details of when they would be able to, what kind of things they're looking for, what the class is, and then Shannon will get back to them and make a object list, which then will be sent off to collections, where at this point then it's a matter of, okay, so this object might not exactly be ready to be handled or anything like that. So we can have changes made and we can change the list and work with that. But then once it's set with collections, then it's a matter of bringing the items from collections up to the classroom for the visit, as well as a presentation being made along with it. However, this is not every visit that is planned is an object handling session, though for many of the more tours and such, a lot of professors will like to bring their class and walk them through, so there's not as much from us on a lot of those. And then behind the scenes for the visits, one of the big things is finding what the class is and the topics they're interested in. So then we can go through the object lists and see, okay, what objects are we pulling for classes that are based around this? And a big part of that is establishing a spreadsheet. A lot of my work has been taking every object list from the sessions this semester and then entering all of the objects into a master sheet alongside information from the database, as well as where the database lacks a little bit, older spreadsheets to show, okay, so we've pulled this object in the past, here's what we've written about it last time we pulled it, that's what we can bring over now as well. But by compiling them, it allows us to see, like, what are people interested in to then work on that area more and improve on how we can work with groups to show them what they are looking for and what they're interested in. And that's the information of all this is compiled into a spreadsheet, and it's maintaining and developing this has been my main work. much of it comes from the database in terms of information. So it's a basic a number and a name that comes from the object list. Then I'll go to the database, pull some descriptive information, a date, some provenance. But a lot of times, one or more of these things will be missing from the database because a lot of it was excavated, over a century ago at this point. So it's a little dicey sometimes, hence why looking through the past spreadsheets is very helpful in seeing, okay, what have the people that have been in the position that I am in before done to deal with this? In addition to this though, that's been my main work, but I've also been working with Avienda and the rest of the team on the student activities board and just kind of getting together some kind of undergraduate group to help us orient ourselves in what we can do to work alongside with and better serve the undergraduate community, because that's something that we feel at the moment there isn't as much interaction as we would like. In addition to that though, one of the biggest things I've found in my time here is how interconnected it all is. It's of course everyone works together, but seeing okay, this is the education, and I have to work so closely with collections in the form of the database, and then also our more IT side that manages the database, as well as of course the actual pulling the objects from collections and all of that. It's no component could run in a vacuum is what I'm truly fully realizing, as well as just I study archaeology, so to be in an archaeology museum is very interesting to see, so this is how they catalog that in the field. I'm not going to do that myself. That's pretty, learning moments like that, seeing the whole process, but
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions for Trent? I have a really basic question. So these spreadsheets
Yes.
that you're creating for the objects that are pulled for the class visits, why are you creating those?
So
What is the goal of that kind of?
So the biggest thing is we use Tableau to kind of get metrics of the topics and themes in a lot of our visits. So the spreadsheets, there's a lot of basic information. The meat of what we're really doing it for is the themes. So I have columns I try to put 3 themes for each object. Sometimes it might be 1 or 2 if it's a little more difficult, and then with these themes we can take and group them together in our data to then see, okay, well, we have a lot of people wanting to visit about magic and medicine, and not so many about ancient statuary. So then we can see okay, if someone asks for magic and medicine, what objects do we have for that as well? We can look that up and pull those and see which ones have been in visits that were popular and such.
And great. I'm also wondering, so the use of Tableau, is that something recent with Will Pessel, the
I
new?
believe so,
Yeah, okay.
Me personally with the Tableau itself, I haven't been oriented too much with it apart from looking at some of the charts. But I think, that's been a relatively new addition.
Yeah, Will Pessel is the new director of education over at the Kelsey, and he seems fantastic. But one of the things that I've noticed, which was why I asked about spreadsheets, is a desire to sort of quantify more who's visiting, what we're doing when they visit, how our collection's being used, things that museums all try to do and slice and dice in different ways. But it's great to see that that's happening.
That's definitely something I've been noticing in my work. Mm-hmm.
Do you feel that, I'm curious around given that the students visit obviously as part of their study, is there a reason they don't come back?
Not that I can particularly tell,
Okay.
but I think one of the biggest things we found is just outside of their particular study, there's not as many people interested in ancient history as we thought, and we don't know if we're not reaching them necessarily, if there are. But it's a lot of it's hard for me to speak on my experience too, because when I went in there studying archaeology, it was always, I felt a bit more connected to it. But I feel like a lot of people just kind of visit for the class, and there wasn't much interest in the first place.
Yep.
So it's working from that to try and see, okay, well then what can we do to foster more of this, so then, okay, well maybe I will come back.
When you visited museums in middle school or whenever you did,
Mm-hmm.
What was it that fostered your interest in?
I would say probably interactivity was always my biggest thing. So that's why I think a lot of the tours we might lose some people on, as opposed to the object handling sessions where you are there in the room and there is ancient pottery, coinage, all kinds of things in front of you, which is for me very nice.
Yeah, I think you're right. And there's actually a program that Kelsey has run before that I've taken classes to, where we look at, it's a collection that's not been formally accessioned because of provenance questions. But it's got all of the documentation, and so we get to study it and handle the pieces. And I think for me, and I think also for the students who've gone with me, it's like, oh wow, we've got the documentation, yet it's not meeting a certain mark that makes us willing to, as an institution, be willing to accession this formally. There remains this kind of floating questions about the dealer, and especially with antiquities.
Sometimes the visitor is really excited about that lack of knowledge. Is
Tell me
this
more.
stolen? Tell me more.
Yeah, and why aren't you doing this? And it also, the ethical and sort of moral work that museums are doing becomes very, very close and personal when you're handling some of the documents. So yeah, the Kelsey does great things.
So I'm interested. I was asking if I could go visit the dentistry museum that I know is on campus.
Yeah.
I don't like dentists. I don't think anyone really likes going. But again, that sort of idea of seeing quite visceral things is something that we're quite separated from in our everyday mediated lives. So I do feel like sometimes your access to real things is something that museums, it's like a superpower that we don't often use well. So I'm always curious as to what is it that stops people from, what's museums stop themselves, but also what is it that stops visitors from coming to things?
I think the biggest thing is I don't think we've put ourselves out there a ton in the past. I think now it's a lot of, we're trying to do more outreach, and so it's, okay, visit, but we're not just here for you to walk in and visit sort of thing. It's kind of, there's more to it in a way.
And there's also an architectural challenge,
Sure.
which
All museums
you'll see
have
when
those.
we visit. Yeah. All museums have those.
Even new ones.
Yes, even new ones, yes. But once you're in the door, then you're captivated. It's just get in there, yeah.
And I think it's also especially the side that stands out is the one that faces the street, and that's the staff entrance.
Yeah.
So it's to enter the galleries, you have to go around to the back of the museum, and not a lot of people walk by or notice the back of the museum, I don't think.
Yeah.
And I kind of took a photo yesterday of the UMMA doors that say these are not the way in. It's like, wow, like wayfinding, like seriously?
Yeah.
It was quite entertaining.
Thank you, Trent.
Thank you.
All right, pizza please, everyone, help yourselves, there's also cookies. And our last presentation for the winter colloquium.
Hi, my name's Elizabeth. I'm a senior studying American culture and minors in museum studies and bachelor's in social change. And I am the research services assistant in the Special Collections Library and Research Center here on campus. So the SCRC is located on the 6th floor of the Hatcher Graduate Library, and we are essentially a giant archive that is available to the public. So I'd say our three biggest roles are acquiring, caring for, interpreting, and sharing collections of rare and unique materials. But then we also offer research appointments in the reading room, which is also on the 6th floor, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 5 p.m. And anybody can make an appointment. It doesn't have to be a researcher, it doesn't have to be someone who's visiting. We actually really love when students come in. Again, you don't have to have any research, anything particular. Anyone can just come in and look at any object they'd like. But then we also fulfill duplication requests of different collection materials. We have a variety of collections in SCRC. We have a film collection, culinary, we have lots of rare books, we have Islamic manuscripts, and then we're also the home of the largest anarchy-focused collection in the country. So I just want to go over some of my responsibilities. So on the left-hand side, these are my day-to-day tasks. So I fulfill all of the duplication requests that come in. I'd say we get anywhere from 5 to 10 a day. And then it's usually a 4 to 6 week process because most of our collection is stored offsite. So it has to be brought from offsite to Hatcher where the scanning machine is, scan it, and then it goes through an editing process. And then, like I said, we get so many a day. So there is a bit of a backup right now. But then I also prepare materials to be transported between Hatcher and our North Campus offsite storage facility. This is a large climate-controlled building. It's actually an old Pfizer laboratory, so it's actually really creepy, but it's really cool. And then I also just help anybody who needs it with general research and just assistance. Then I also pull and reshelve all materials for research appointments, exhibitions, and visiting classes. But over the past couple months, since I really started my internship, my roles really evolved. So right now I am processing a newly acquired Robert Frost collection for the archives. We already have a pre-existing Robert Frost archive, but during some exploration a couple months ago, I discovered some more boxes that had accessions numbers, but they were never actually processed. So I'm going through the process of finishing that and then combining the two to make one big Robert Frost family and friends archive. And I'm working with lots of different materials. There's audio, visual. Robert Frost loved photographing nature, so there's lots of that, but then there's also, of course, manuscripts of his writing. And I'm also working with Julie Harada, who's the curator of the Labby collection, that's our Anarchy collection, to prepare different materials for an exhibit that's opening up in UMA next winter. Julie Alt is a visiting artist, and she's going to be doing a exhibit, I think it's a photography-based exhibit. And then the project that I worked on last semester that I'm the most proud of is my Robert Frost exhibition. I focused on his role as a writer, but also an educator and just an American icon. So I was the sole curator on this project, so I was responsible for everything. I selected the materials, laid out the display cases, I wrote all the labels, and then also designed all the advertisements and posters. And then a lot of the objects that I chose for the exhibit were part of the accession collections, so they're not actually made public. They're not actually available to the public yet. They will be once I'm done processing. So right now it's kind of like a fun little secret. But then the exhibit was actually only supposed to be open through the end of February, but one of the curators on staff asked if we could extend it. So now it's open through April 3rd. So if you want to go visit it, you totally should. It's on the 6th floor. And then I just want to talk about a little bit about the curating and the processing roles. So like I mentioned, I created that poster, the advertisement, that went up on the library website. It went out to the student newsletter. You also may have seen it on the televisions around the different libraries on campus. And then on the top left, that is a photograph of a student journal that was dedicated to Robert Frost while he was a professor here at the University of Michigan. And then processing, before I can actually start going through the accessioned boxes, I have to go through the older Frost boxes. Because that collection was acquired about 30 years ago, archival processing has changed a lot in the 30 years. So I had to go through all of them and take out these interlay papers. So it used to be that you would take legal size sheets of paper and they would go in between every object. But then in the past 10 years or so, archivists realized that that actually doesn't do anything. So I had to go through and take them out, and I'm only about halfway through, and there's probably a good 200 sheets of paper. Same thing with those envelopes. There's no reason for them. But then I also had to work with the conservation department on some things. As you'll see in the bottom right, that's a bust of Robert Frost, and his nose is chipped. So I had to consult with a conservator to see if there's anything we can do to fix it or what we can do in terms of handling it in the future. And then I've had a lot of really cool opportunities working in special collections, and I think my favorite one was probably last summer. I was hired as a temporary archival consultant by the company Adam Matthew Digital. They are a UK-based company that specializes in digital collections and providing access to primary sources, especially those that are abroad.
So I had to review over 8,000 images and documents across 2 of our collections, and that all had to be completed within the span of 2 months. So I conducted these assessments by noting composition, if there was any problems with them, their condition, but then also the measurements, and then if there's any information that potentially had to be redacted, so that when they digitize this in the collection, when they digitize the collection in the future, which I believe they're starting next month, it'll just make the process a lot more smooth. And then I just want to end with some pictures. So all the way on the far left, this was also from last summer. I had to complete a collection inventory of a new culinary collection that was donated by an estate, and I would say there's probably like 4,000 cookbooks or food-related books. I had to go through every single one of them, see them in the background on that top picture, find the author, the publisher, and the year. And I'm wearing a mask because some of the books dated back to the 15,000s, and they were 1500s, sorry, and they were super moldy. So I was only allowed to work in like 45-minute increments because the conservation department told me I wasn't allowed to be exposed for longer than that. So that was fun in the stacks and Hatcher in the middle of August. But that's just an example of one of the cookbooks. And then in the middle, I'm also a part of the instruction and outreach committee in special collections. So I get to work with some of our curators, archivists, and then collection managers. And what we do primarily is we organize these events called Third Thursdays at the library. They're held in special collections from 4 to 6 on the third Thursday of the month. And there's a different theme every month. So the top picture is from last September. The conservation department came in and brought in some objects from their current projects that they're working on. And this is a propped baby from Robert Altman's film Dr. T and the Women that had just got sent back to the conservation department from Buffalo State University. They found the baby in the collection. It had been misplaced, and it was like kind of immersed in this weird liquid, and they had no idea what it was. So they sent it to Buff State, which is one of the best conservation departments in the country, and they were like, can you figure out what this is and if we can keep it? So Buff State examined it, they cleaned it up. It was there for about 6 months, and then it just got brought back. And then last month's theme was cows versus horses, and that was one of the posters we pulled. But we always just try to pick random topics that obviously we have a lot of materials in the collection for, but we also try to pull objects that you wouldn't really see often or that aren't frequently collected. And then on the last, over on the right, I get to take lots of field trips. So last December, the entire department visited the Michigan Research Center Museum, which I'd never been to before, and we met with some of the curators in the paleontology collection. I wasn't allowed to take a lot of pictures, but I took some pictures of some skulls, which I thought was cool. But then we also saw, samurai swords, hats. We saw some Native American woven baskets, which were really cool. But yeah, that's just kind of the tip of the iceberg, really. But I'm starting my Master's of Library Information Science with an archives management concentration this fall, and this job has prepared me so well for it. So it's really exciting, and thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Any questions? Yeah, Emma.
I'm curious about when you were curating the Robert Frost exhibit, was there like some challenge that you faced that you didn't expect would be a part of curating, or like what was the most unexpected part of that whole experience? So I had kind of went in with an idea. When I found out that Robert Frost taught at Michigan, I kind of wanted to focus on that and his educational impact. But then once I went into the archive, I realized we actually didn't have a lot of information on that because it was donated by his great-grandson, so he just didn't have a lot of relevant information on it. But the biggest challenge was the Robert Frost collection is stored off-site on North Campus. And when I had requested for it to get brought over for me to start reviewing, they sent me the wrong boxes. So they sent me the accessioned boxes, which is how I ended up realizing that we have a bunch of Robert Frost boxes that weren't processed. So I was going through these boxes, and I was pulling items that I wanted to use, and then I was consulting the finding aid one day, and I was like, these don't, because everything's in folders, and I was like, these don't match. And this was after a month of already going through everything. So then we had to like figure out what had happened, and then I finally got the right boxes sent over. But that's how a lot of the items ended up being put in the exhibit, was because for about a month I was looking at the wrong boxes and nobody knew.
What was if you had to do like, what was the one thing you wanted to do in that exhibition that you couldn't do?
I wanted to put the bust of his head in it. Like, I don't know, it was just, when I opened the box and I saw it, I was like, this is so, like, different. But the display cases are meant for flat objects only. And I did ask, and I was like, can I just lay it down? They're like, no, you can't lay it down. But I really wanted to do that. I thought that would have been cool, have a 3D object. But a lot of what I had intended to do, I was able to. So I ended up doing a different theme for each of the different cases. So I was able to tell a bit of a story about his life, which I was really happy about.
And what was the thing from the exhibition? I went over, of course, when you gave the gallery talk, which was great. Thank you, Elizabeth. But first of all, discovering, not as much as you'd hoped or thought there might be about his time here teaching at Michigan. Were there other objects, though, that were happy surprises that you thought, oh, wow, I didn't know, and maybe no one really knows?
Yeah, so the reason I added that the exhibit focuses on his status as an American icon is because there was a lot of information pertaining to when he spoke at President Kennedy's inauguration. So there was letters and what was sent to him when they asked him if he would speak. And then there's also a statement from Congress recognizing Robert Frost as the official American poet. There was also stamps, his stamp, and then there's this gold coin that also had a photo of him on it. But there was a lot pertaining to that specific point in his life. But then there's also a lot of materials talking about President Kennedy, who spoke at events honoring Frost after he passed away as well. So you could see that they had a nice relationship with one another. So I thought that was a really interesting thing to find because I didn't know much about it beforehand.
Great. Thank you, Elizabeth. It was really interesting. Also, Elizabeth mentioned this collaboration between the special collections in the library and the UMA show for next year, and something that, UMA's advocating this for a number of years, but we start to see with some of the collections is a really nice cross-pollination, so where they're using artifacts from this museum, this special collection, this library, this archive, and bringing them together in really interesting conversations. Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us, and especially to the presenters, another round of applause. It's a really special opportunity to hear from each of you about the work you've done in your internships. I get to read your reflections, but that's just for me, and then other people don't get to hear about this important work, so thank you very much. And as you run out to your day, which is sunny, like a miracle, I wish you a happy St. Patrick's Day, and also ask that you take a piece of pizza and a cookie as you go, so that you're nourished physically as well as intellectually. All right, take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm gonna get back over to Uma just down the hall, because you're welcome. I'm gonna sit down there. Okay. And then I have someone meet, so I can. Okay. Or do you make
Great, well, thank you so much for your.
Super interesting. Such a good opportunity.
Something that I just started recently, we did it, my first ones were online.
Yeah.
I'm reading my exposure, the person chatting with them. The exposure of the students potentially actually exploring what people do.
Yeah.
It's cool, and we do record them.
I know, but
It's not just students. But yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. There's a lot of discussion in Australia. It's very same solution.
It is cool, and one of the,
Good diversity of institutions like that.
yeah, and sometimes it's mostly off campus. You know, it'll depend where people have been working.
Sure.
So we had the one from Howell, Michigan, about 40 minutes from here.
Okay.
But I was just gonna say that one of the things was Carly mentioned of Dave Chaverka. So he's at UMA. He actually
oh, you're fine.
is a graduate of
I'm just
our
gonna close it
program
all
way
up.
back in the day, one of the graduate programs. Thank you, Carly. He was hired in on okay. He was hired, yeah, I guess that, he was hired in on I think actually it might have been a fellow, a Mellon fellow.
Okay. Yeah.
And they've maintained the
Take what you
position.
can, 'cause I gotta-
His job
Okay, thank you. I got
initially
grad students
was,
that are gonna hound me when I get
let's get the classes
Thank you
into
so
the
much.
museum.
Yeah.
And with his sort of continued work, I think I was talking to an architect who's done some work for OMA. He said one of the things they look at is who uses the space.
Yeah.
And UMA is one of the biggest usage.
Yeah. Just walking around, they're sitting and seeing all the students.
And then a big part of it too is that class engagement, which literally I think when Dave started, it was, hello, Professor X, you know, we've got these collections, can we integrate that into something you're doing in your class? And now it's kind of flipped where they have more demand than they can actually.
It's a good problem. Good problem to
Yes,
have.
it is a good problem.
Super cool.
All right, so I will see, thank you so much, Christy.
No problem. I'm gonna go back to my dungeon.
Thank you for bringing the sheets up.
Cool.
Well, I will be in the lower level of.
Sure.
So you can find me there, or I'll find you in the OMA Cafe around 12:30.
Okay. Sounds good.
It's not far to North Campus, it's just I thought,
Yeah.
I'm not sure where the studio is meeting. I know it's the third floor of the architecture building, but it's not a small building, so. And I can show you a few things on the way over there.
Yeah, for sure.
And if, I got an email from the Syndicate Museum of Dentistry.
Oh, cool.
And Tammy, the director
Oh, yeah.
curator, would love to
Oh,
meet
cool.
with you Thursday afternoon.
Oh, super good. That's
So I
fine.
added it to the itinerary, we
cool.
just need to decide when you wanna see her
Sure.
between 1 and 4.
Yeah, cool.
So you look at it and decide, and
Oh, sure. Yeah.
I sent
mean,
the
I guess-
message, and they're like, yes, bring it.
I love medical collections.
Okay. You're in social.
We cancel both the lecture, let's go.
Yeah, I can't.